Welcome to Life Stories, where sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes. What if the most powerful song you'll ever hear doesn't come from a stage, but from a child who hasn't spoken in 2 years? What if hope didn't sound like applause, but like a girl whispering the first note of her own truth? In a forgotten town blanketed in snow, a single father opens his door to two lost sisters and accidentally unlocks a silence that's been haunting his home for far too long. This is a story about music that doesn't save people, but reminds them they're worth saving. It's about second chances, unfinished songs, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for attention, just a chance to be heard. Stay with us. This one might just find a part of you you thought was gone. Now, let's begin. The snow came early that year in Cedar Falls. By the second week of November, the sky was the color of old silver, and the wind had a habit of pushing through clothes like they weren't even there. The town, a dot on the map somewhere between faded dreams and truck stop coffee, seemed to hold its breath beneath the weight of another winter. And Ben Carter, former guitarist turned carpenter, drove the same battered pickup truck he'd driven since before his wife died. With the same radio that hadn't worked since that night either. The heater in the truck rattled but didn't warm much. His fingers, calloused from years of both music and wood, gripped the steering wheel tightly as sleep began to pepper the windshield. Home wasn't far. A quiet cabin tucked at the edge of the forest, where grief had settled in like dust, and his daughter Riley spoke in shrugs and silences. That day, something felt different. A stillness. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that makes animals freeze in the woods before the storm hits. He almost didn't see it, the rusted shipping container off the side of the service road near the old rail line, tucked beneath pine trees stripped bare. The doors were ajar, flapping gently in the wind like something out of a nightmare. He might have passed it like he had 100 times before. But a hand, a child's, slapped against the metal with the urgency of drowning. Ben slammed the brakes. The tires skidded across the gravel, the truck jolted, and then there was nothing but the cold and the sound of his boots crunching over snow. Inside the container, it smelled of mold and rot, and the kind of cold that bites bone. Two girls huddled in the corner, wrapped in a tattered blanket, their cheeks raw, lips trembling. Twins. One clutched a crumpled paper snowflake. The other met Ben's eyes without flinching. "Please," she whispered. "Don't tell them we hid here." Ben didn't ask who them was. He just took off his coat and wrapped it around them both, the way he used to when Riley was little, before silence moved in and made a home in her lungs. "Come on," he said gently. "You need to get warm." Back at the cabin, the girls introduced themselves as Emmy and Wren. 9 3/4, Emmy said proudly. Mom said decimals count. Ben didn't press. Not yet. Riley watched them from the hallway, eyes wide, body still. She hadn't spoken a full sentence in 18 months. Not since the auditorium, the spotlight, the whispers. She had collapsed on stage mid-song, and her voice had disappeared into a place no one could reach. Not even him. That night, as the girls curled up on the couch beneath a patchwork quilt, Emmy began to hum. Wren joined in. It wasn't polished, but it was beautiful in the way thunder is beautiful when it rolls far in the distance. You feel it in your chest more than your ears. Riley emerged from the shadows like a ghost halfway home. She said nothing, just leaned against the doorframe and listened. The sound that used to live in the walls, the one Ben had stopped believing in, came back. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. And then, something happened. At 2:11 a.m., Ben sat in the kitchen with an untouched mug of coffee, staring at a small wooden box on the shelf. Inside were recordings, old ones, of lullabies and laughter. Riley's voice and her mother's tangled together in forgotten songs. He hadn't touched them since the funeral. But something about Emmy's harmony, the way Wren followed without fear, pulled him toward the past. He clicked play. The house filled with ghost song. And for a moment, he didn't feel alone. In the morning, Riley was already at the kitchen table. She didn't look at him, but her fingers curled around the mug of cocoa he placed in front of her. Emmy and Wren came bounding down the hallway, giggling, arguing over who got the red plate with no chips. Riley said nothing, but she didn't leave. Later, Emmy said casually, "We should sing something for the school talent show." Ben froze mid-step. Ren added, "Not for a trophy, just to be heard." He wanted to say no, wanted to protect them from the kind of laugh that doesn't sound like a laugh at all, the kind Riley had once crumpled under. But then, Riley did something she hadn't done in over a year. She nodded. A few days later, they rehearsed in the living room. Ben tuned his old guitar for the first time in forever. The melody that formed was fragile but full of light. And then, on a quiet Thursday evening, as the fire crackled and the snow fell softly outside, Riley opened her mouth and sang. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was enough to stop time. What Ben didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone had recorded their rehearsal through the thin apartment wall, that the video would be posted online, that by morning a whisper would begin to echo in places none of them could imagine. And someone important, was already listening. Have you ever heard a voice so honest, it made you question what silence really means? What would you risk to help someone else be heard for the first time? The next morning, a letter arrived in Ben's mailbox, one with a logo he hadn't seen in years, and a name he thought he'd never hear again. Ben hadn't seen her name in years. The letter sat on the kitchen counter like a dare. He stared at it while the girls ran barefoot across the wood floor behind him, laughter echoing through the cabin like it had been waiting for an excuse. Riley sat cross-legged in the corner, quietly sketching notes into a journal she'd begun keeping. Something private, with pages folded over as if guarding thoughts too fragile for the world. But all Ben could see was the letterhead. Harper Lane. Once, she had been everything. Harper was a rising star when he met her, years before Riley was born. Sharp-minded, fiercely talented, the kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room but took the air with her. She'd left Cedar Falls with a full scholarship, a record deal on the table, and a promise to never look back. Except now her name was stamped at the bottom of an email from the National Youth Arts Foundation, inviting Riley Carter and company to perform in a private showcase in Chicago. All expenses paid, not a competition. A debut. Ben reread the signature. Harper Lane, artistic director. He folded the letter in half, then in half again, then shoved it in the drawer beside the stove. Later that night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Emmy and Ren curled like commas on the couch, Riley dozing with her lyric notebook resting on her chest. Ben stepped outside onto the porch, the old floorboards groaning beneath his weight. Ellis followed, wrapped in one of his flannels. "She's the one, isn't she?" Ellis asked quietly, her breath fogging in the cold. "The one who used to sing with you?" Ben didn't answer at first. He looked up at the stars. They felt farther away than usual. "She left," he said finally. "Before Riley. Before everything. We were a mess of could-have-beens. And then, she didn't look back." "But now she's listening," Ellis said. "That has to mean something." He shook his head. "Or she's doing what she's always done, showing up when it's convenient. I'm not dragging Riley into some showcase just to reopen old wounds." Ellis leaned against the railing beside him. "Maybe it's not about you." The words hit harder than they should have. Inside, Riley stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. Her gaze landed on the edge of the drawer where the letter peeked out. The next morning, she stood at the kitchen table while Ben poured her hot cocoa. "I saw it," she said. He froze. "Saw what?" "The letter." Her voice was steady. It still surprised him every time she spoke. "Are you mad?" she asked. He set down the mug. "No, just cautious. She used to sing with you," Ben nodded. "We wrote songs together a long time ago." "Why'd you stop?" He looked at her, really looked at her, because sometimes the people you sing with aren't the ones who stay. Riley considered this for a moment, then quietly replied, "I still want to go." That night, after the dishes were done and the girls were tucked in, Ben sat alone with his guitar. He didn't play it, just rested his fingers along the frets like touching something old and sacred. In his mind, he heard Harper's voice, not from the radio but from memory, singing beside him on back porches, candlelight flickering, promises made too easily. What if she wanted to fix things? What if she didn't? By the time they reached Chicago, the air was different. dense with expectation, high-rises gleaming like ambitions you could touch if you stretched far enough. The showcase was held in a converted cathedral, arched ceilings, stained glass windows that filtered the winter light into ribbons of color. The girls were silent when they stepped inside. Riley's fingers twitched at her sides. Ren reached out and touched her sleeve. Emmy whispered, "It's just another stage. Doesn't matter how tall it is." Ben turned to speak, but stopped, because standing at the far end of the room, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp as ever, was Harper Lane. She hadn't changed much, still carried herself like a headline. She didn't smile when she saw him, just nodded. After the soundcheck, Harper pulled Ben aside into a hallway that smelled of lemon polish and old wood. "I saw the video," she said. "That harmony at the bridge, it was raw, untrained, but honest." He crossed his arms. "That's kind of the point." She tilted her head. "Is it? Or are you afraid of what they could become if they actually tried?" His jaw tightened. "Don't mistake control for care, Ben," she said. "Let the girl sing." She walked away before he could respond. That night, just before the performance, Riley asked him something she hadn't said since she was 4 years old. "Will you sit close?" He blinked. "Of course." Her voice was small, not as a dad, as the one who used to believe. Ben sat in the front row, hands clenched between his knees. Riley took the stage with Emmy and Ren. When she opened her mouth, the first note that came out wasn't what anyone expected. It was Harper's melody, the one they'd written together years ago, the one he never finished after she left, the one he never taught Riley. She had found it anyway. Her voice wavered, but held. Emmy steadied her. Ren layered in low and sure. Ben felt something break inside him, softly, like the first crack in ice before the thaw. And in the shadows of the cathedral, Harper closed her eyes, not as a director, as someone who remembered. Have you ever heard a song that pulled you back to a version of yourself you thought you'd buried? As the final note rang through stained glass and silence, Ben Carter stood up, heart racing, because he suddenly realized Riley hadn't just found her voice. She had claimed his too, and Harper Lane wasn't done with him yet. Riley stood beneath the vaulted ceiling, her voice still lingering in the air like the scent of rain on pavement. For a moment, no one moved. Then Harper began to clap, not politely, not for show, slow, measured, real. One by one, others followed, until the entire room, students, judges, mentors, strangers, rose to their feet. Ben sat frozen in his chair, not out of pride, not out of awe, but because for the first time since the accident, since the silence, since grief claimed every corner of their lives, he wasn't needed. Riley had become her own melody. Later, backstage, Harper approached him, her blazer still sharp, but her eyes softer now. Time, it seemed, had humbled them both. "She rewrote it," Harper said, nodding toward Riley's journal clutched to her chest. "The song we started. She gave it an ending." Ben exhaled slowly. She never even knew the chords. She didn't need to. She had the ache. They stood in silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. "I wasn't ready," Harper said finally. "Back then. You were always holding too much, and I was terrified of being held." He didn't offer forgiveness. That wasn't what she was asking for. "She's good," Harper added, nodding toward Riley, who now sat cross-legged between Emmy and Ren, braiding thread into bracelets they'd bought from a street vendor outside. "You know that, right?" Ben nodded. "She's better than we ever were." Harper smiled faintly. "So what happens now?" That was the question, wasn't it? Back in Cedar Falls, the snow had mostly melted, leaving behind muddy roads and the sharp, earthy scent of thaw. Spring was creeping in around the edges, tentative, like someone unsure if they were welcome. Riley returned different. Not louder, but lighter. She sang freely now, humming while doing dishes, whistling as she walked through the woods behind the cabin. The sound was never for anyone else. It was just part of her again. Ben watched quietly, learning when to step back, when to lean in. One afternoon she handed him her notebook. "I want to record it," she said. He blinked. "The new one?" She nodded. "The ending. It's not really for anyone. I just need it to exist somewhere outside my head." They went to the garage-turned-studio, Emmy and Ren close behind. Ellis lit a candle on the windowsill, claiming it was for a creative atmosphere, though everyone suspected it was more for grounding than anything else. The song Riley had written wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't about silence, or music, or even grief. It was about waiting. Waiting for the sky to clear. Waiting for someone to notice. Waiting for a voice that sounded like your own. Ben played the guitar. Emmy handled harmony. Ren added soft rhythm with her hands tapping the wooden bench in perfect time. And Riley sang. At one point, her voice cracked just slightly on the line. I stopped asking to be found when I realized I'd never been lost. But she didn't stop. She kept going. When they finished, no one spoke for a long time. The recorder light blinked steadily, like a heartbeat. That night, Ben sat alone on the porch, watching the trees sway in the wind. Ellis stepped out, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. She sat beside him. She's already halfway gone, Ellis said gently. You see that, don't you? Ben nodded. And she's not afraid anymore. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Hopper's offer, a summer program for gifted youth at the foundation, mentorship, workshops, a small scholarship, all expenses paid. She'll go, he said quietly, and I won't stop her. But she's not coming back the same. Ellis smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. None of us ever do. In late May, Riley stood on the steps of the cabin, her suitcase at her feet. Emmy and Ren clung to her like ivy, promising FaceTime calls and shared playlists and a group chat that would never go silent. Ben tried to smile. He failed. Riley hugged him last. You're still my favorite harmony, she whispered into his chest. He couldn't speak. Not without breaking. So he just held her, the way he used to before the silence, before the song, before everything. As the van pulled away down the gravel road, he stood on the porch long after it disappeared, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, eyes on the trees. Inside, the cabin felt too quiet again, too still, but this time he didn't feel empty. He felt full, of songs sung, of moments kept, of a voice that had finally come home, even if the girl who carried it had to leave to understand what it truly meant. That night, Ben sat in the studio alone. He opened Riley's notebook one more time. On the last page, in her neat, careful handwriting, she'd written, Dad, don't wait for me to sing again. Sing first, so I'll know the world's still listening. Ben closed the notebook, picked up the guitar, and began to play. The strings were worn, the frets smooth from decades of calluses, but the sound, God, the sound, was the same as it had always been. True. What part of this story resonated with you most deeply? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you love this story, type 100 below to show your support. Where in the world are you watching from? Share this video with someone who needs a quiet song today. Thank you for spending time with us at Life Stories.